All right, so today we're going deep into Aphra Behn's The Young King, or The Mistake,
Okay.
a play that's got it all: romance, mistaken identities, political intrigue, you name it. We're working with excerpts from the play itself and some pretty interesting critical commentary to help us break it all down.
Right. And this play, it's more than just a story, It's a window into what 17th century theater was like and the heroic romance genre, which was so popular back then.
Okay, so we're talking knights, damsels in distress, grand adventures, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Think epic quests, larger than life heroes, these complicated, intertwining love stories. And, these heroic romances, they often have really elaborate plots,
Huh.
with what one critic called a prolix detached episodes and histories.
hmm
Basically, it means lots of different storylines all woven together. Could be pretty tough to follow for the average reader.
Yeah, sounds like it could get confusing.
Yeah.
So how does Ben's play fit into all of this?
Well, The Young King, it has all the classic elements of heroic romance. But what sets it apart, I think, is Ben's twist on this popular motif. It's called the Frolicsome Duke.
Okay, now you've got my attention. What's so special about this frolicsome Duke thing?
Well, it's a tale that pops up all over European literature in different forms, going all the way back to like the 16th century.
Wow.
You can find it in Richard Edwards's collection of tales, and there's even a ballad literally called The Frolicsome Duke. And then it even pops up in like scholarly works like Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, all over the place.
So it's a story that really resonated with people across different times and cultures. What does Ben do with it? How does she use it?
So she kind of weaves it into her play in a clever way. The Frolicsome Duke, usually it involves a nobleman who disguises himself as a commoner, often, for fun or adventure. But in The Young King, Ben, she uses it to explore the whole idea of identity, like what makes us who we are and what can happen when we live a lie.
I see. So she's taking this well-known motif and she's adding like this deeper, more thought-provoking element to it.
Right, exactly. And she's doing all of this while also, navigating the trends of the London stage at the time. Remember, this was a time when heroic tragedy was all the rage.
Oh, right, right.
Right.
So how did she adapt The Young King for this specific theatrical climate? I mean,
Yeah.
she originally based it on a French heroic romance, right?
Yeah, and she transformed it pretty cleverly, actually, into rhyming couplets. That was, the fashionable style at the time. And if you look closely at the play's language, you can still kind of see these traces of the original manuscript form, especially in scenes like the one between Cleomena and Urania, or in Orsami's big speech in Act 4.
Yeah.
Little hints here and there.
Wow, it's fascinating to see how she blended all these different influences to create something new. But speaking of navigating those theatrical trends, didn't she like almost have a major clash with another play?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Just as she was about to stage The Young King, Buckingham's The Rehearsal premiered.
Now the rehearsal, there was a satire, right? Wasn't it poking fun at heroic tragedies?
Yeah.
That must have thrown a wrench in her plans.
It definitely did. Buckingham's play, it kind of sparked this whole wave of parodies, and Ben, being the savvy playwright that she was, she decided to delay her production.
Smart move.
She knew that audiences, they're in the mood for mockery, and she didn't want her play, which took heroic romance seriously, to get caught in the crossfire.
Yeah, that seems like a very smart move. So how did this delay affect how The Young King was received? Did it end up being overshadowed by all the satire and parody that was going on?
Well, that's a good question, and unfortunately, we don't have a complete picture. There aren't any surviving records of its initial performance.
But it did get published, Ryan. That must count for something.
It did, and not just once, but twice, actually. And that suggests to me that it did find an audience.
So maybe The Young King wasn't a total flop, but from what I've read, it's often considered a lesser work compared to some of her later plays. Why do you think that is?
It might be because of the style. The play has a very distinct Baroque feel to it, with those heightened emotions and dramatic flourishes that were popular at the time. And maybe that style just hasn't aged as well as some of her other more streamlined works.
Interesting. So even though it's not as well known as some of her other plays, you're saying it still has merit.
Absolutely. It may be more Baroque than some of her later work, but it's a play with a lot to offer, and it gives us valuable insights into Ben's development as a playwright.
Well, before we get into the plot itself, there's this really intriguing detail about the play's dedication. Ben dedicates the young king to someone she calls Philaster.
Right, and she uses some pretty flowery language to describe this philaster, saying that they possess 1,000 charms of wit, good nature, and beauty.
That sounds suspiciously like a romantic interest to me.
Mhm.
But who is this mysterious Philaster?
Well, unfortunately, their identity remains a mystery. Some scholars speculate that it could have been someone Ben met during her time in Suriname.
Ah, right. She had quite the adventurous life before she turned to playwriting. So Philaster could be, I don't know, a fellow traveler, a colonial official, even a dashing pirate.
Right. It's all speculation, but it definitely adds another layer of intrigue to the play.
I love it. It reminds us that behind these great works of literature, there are real people with their own passions and secrets and desires. Okay, so now that we've set the scene, are you ready to dive into the story itself?
Absolutely. Let's meet the characters and unravel this whole royal mess of mistaken identities.
Let's do it. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about this mysterious Philaster and how Aphra Behn really had to strategize to get her play on the London stage. It's amazing how playwrights back then had to be so aware of the trends and even the competition. But enough about context. Let's get into the plot.
Yes, let's unravel this tangled tale. So, at the heart of the young king, we have Orsames, this young man who's raised in isolation, completely unaware that he is the rightful heir to the throne.
Classic mistaken identity trope, right? Always makes for good drama. So how does this mistake come to light? How do we find out?
Well, Orsames, he grows up believing that he's the son of a shepherd.
Yeah.
And he's content, with this simple life until a series of events kind of lead him to the royal court, where his true lineage is revealed.
I bet that throws his whole world upside down. Suddenly he's thrust into this position of power and responsibility that he never asked for. Talk about a shock to the system.
Exactly. And this sudden shift, it forces him to confront this question of identity. Like, who is he really? Is he the shepherd's son, or is he the rightful king? And can he reconcile these two seemingly very different parts of himself?
Makes you think about how much of our identity is shaped by circumstance versus choice,
Absolutely. And that's one of the key themes that Ben explores in this play. And she adds another layer of complexity to this whole question of identity with the character of Thursander. He's a Scythian prince who disguises himself as a woman named Clementis.
Hold on. So we've got mistaken identity,
Yeah.
A&D disguise. But Ben was really going for the dramatic irony here. But why does he go undercover? What's his game?
Well, Thursander's disguise, it's partly strategic. He needs to infiltrate the Dacian court for political reasons, but there's also this romantic element at play. He's drawn to Cleomena, the warrior princess of Dacia, and he hopes to win her heart.
A warrior princess who falls for a woman who's actually a prince in disguise. This play just keeps getting better and better. And
Right.
it sounds like it really plays with that idea of appearances being deceiving, right? I mean, Cleomena is attracted to this persona that Thursander has created, not necessarily who he truly is.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Ben. She seems to be commenting on how easily we can be fooled by facades, both in love and in politics. But the irony is that Cleomena, this strong, independent warrior princess, she's the one who falls for this elaborate charade.
It makes you wonder if Ben was trying to make a point about societal expectations, especially when it comes to women. Like maybe Cleomena is expected to be this fierce, untamable figure, but underneath it all, she longs for love and connection, just like anyone else.
That's a really insightful observation. Ben, as a female playwright in a very male-dominated world, she was likely very sensitive to the limitations that were placed on women in her society. It wouldn't be surprising if she was using this play to kind of subtly critique those limitations.
Now, you mentioned that Thursander needed to infiltrate the Dacian court for political reasons. What's going on there? Is there like a war brewing or?
Well, there's definitely a history of conflict between Dacia and Scythia, but the young king doesn't really focus solely on those national tensions. It's more interested in the personal conflicts that arise from these divided loyalties.
Okay, so we've got Mistaken identity, disguise, political intrigue. Is there anything else we should know before we jump into the themes I'm ready to analyze?
Oh, we can't forget the love triangle, because
Yeah.
it's not just Cleomena who falls for Thyrsander, disguised as Clemanthus. Olympia, the daughter of the Dacian general, is also smitten with him, unaware of his true identity.
Yeah. Oh no, that's a recipe for heartbreak, and it perfectly sets up those conflicting desires you mentioned earlier. Cleomen, torn between her duty to her country and her love for the enemy, and Thyrsander, caught between his deception and his growing feelings, and poor Olympia, falling for someone who's not who they seem.
Exactly. And all of these tangled relationships and hidden identities, they create this web of complications that Ben uses to explore these bigger themes of love, duty, and of course, identity.
Okay, let's talk themes. I'm
Uh,
ready to go deep.
all right. Let's start with love, which, as you pointed out, really takes center stage in The Young King. But it's not just romantic love that we see. It's the love between siblings, the love between a mother and son, the love between friends. It's this whole tapestry of different kinds of love that really shape the characters' choices and destinies.
But love isn't always easy, is it? Especially in this play, where it's constantly clashing with duty. Cleomena, for example, she's torn between her feelings for Thyrsander and her responsibilities as a princess. I mean, she can't exactly run off with the enemy, right?
Precisely, and that inner conflict, it's what makes her such a compelling character. She's not just a one-dimensional damsel in distress. She's a strong, capable woman who is forced to make these difficult choices in a world that often, pits love against duty.
It's a dilemma that still resonates today, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how often do we have to choose between what we want and what we feel obligated to do?
All the time. And Ben, she captures that struggle, I think, brilliantly in The Young King. She shows us that these choices, they aren't always clear cut, and that sometimes there just aren't any easy answers.
And what about identity? We talked about how Orsemes has to grapple with his true lineage and who he really is, but how else does it play out in the play?
Well, it's not just about individual identity. Ben also explores this idea of national identity and how it shapes our perceptions of ourselves and others. The Dacians and the Scythians, for example, they're presented as very distinct cultures, each with their own values and traditions, and those differences often fuel the conflict between them.
So it's like she's saying that our sense of who we are is often tied to the groups that we belong to, whether it's, our family, our nation, or even our social class. And those affiliations can blind us to the humanity of those that we perceive as different.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message, especially in a time when, political and social divisions seem to be widening. Ben is encouraging her audience to look beyond those superficial differences and recognize the shared humanity that connects us all.
It's amazing how a play written over 300 years ago can still feel so relevant today.
Isn't it? And that's what makes Aphra Behn such an extraordinary playwright. She had this incredible ability to tap into these timeless themes, to explore the complexities of the human experience in a way that transcends time and place.
Okay, so we've talked about love, duty, identity.
Yeah.
Are we missing anything? Any other big ideas that Ben is wrestling with in The Young King?
Well, there's one element we haven't discussed yet that adds another layer of symbolism to the play. Remember those vivid dreams that Orsames has?
Oh yeah. Those are pretty wild. He dreams of being crowned, of battles, of betrayals, of beautiful women who like tempt him with power and glory. It's all very dramatic and over the top.
Exactly. And that's intentional. Remember, this is Baroque theater. It's all about spectacle, about creating this heightened, almost surreal experience for the audience. But those dreams, they're not just there for entertainment value. They're symbolic representations of Orsame's inner turmoil, his conflicting desires and his anxieties about his newfound role as king.
So they're like a window into his subconscious, a way for Ben to show us what's really going on beneath the surface.
Precisely. They give us these glimpses into his fears and aspirations, his vulnerabilities and his strengths. They reveal a depth to his character that we might not otherwise see.
This is why I love digging deep into these classic works. There's always something more to discover, some hidden meaning or subtle nuance that you might miss on a first read.
And with a playwright as clever and multi-layered as Aphra Behn, the discoveries never seem to end.
Okay, so we've covered the themes, the symbolism, the historical context, But what about the play's lasting power? Why should someone today in the 21st century care about a play like The Young King?
Well, for one thing, it's a darn good story. It's got everything: adventure, romance, political intrigue, mistaken identities, disguises, dramatic reveals. It's like a 17th century soap opera. But it's also a play that makes you think. Ben isn't afraid to tackle, these big questions about love, power, identity, and the choices that we make in the face of conflicting obligations. And those are questions that are just as relevant today as they were in Ben's time.
I'm also really struck by how Ben portrays her female characters, especially Cleomena. She's not just a passive love interest or a damsel in distress. She's a strong, intelligent, and capable woman who grapples with these complex emotions and makes difficult decisions. That must have been pretty groundbreaking for the time.
Absolutely. Ben was a pioneer in many ways. She was one of the first women in England to make a living as a writer, and she wasn't afraid to challenge societal norms or to give voice to female perspectives that were often, silenced or marginalized. And that makes her work all the more valuable even centuries later.
I agree. It's important to remember that these great works of literature, they weren't created in a vacuum. They were products of their time, reflecting the social, political, and cultural norms of the era. But the best ones, like The Young King, they managed to transcend those limitations and speak to something universal about the human experience. And that's why they continue to resonate with us today.
Well said. And that's a perfect segue to our final part where we'll explore the ending of The Young King and discuss its lasting impact.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back to unravel the final act of this fascinating play.
And we're back for the final act of our deep dive into Aphra Behn's The Young King. All right, so we've talked about identities and those big themes, love, duty, identity. Now it's time to see how it all comes together.
So how does Ben resolve all this drama? What's the big payoff?
Well, if you're expecting a typical happy ending, with all the loose ends neatly tied up, you might be in for a bit of a surprise.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Give me the juicy details. Does Orsames embrace his royal destiny? Does
Wow.
Cleomena end up with her Scythian prince Charming? I mean, does anyone actually get what they want?
Ben throws a few curveballs our way. Or Samis, for example, he isn't exactly thrilled about being king. He'd rather spend his time composing poetry and admiring flowers than ruling a kingdom.
That's not exactly the image of a powerful conquering hero. So what happens? Does he abdicate? Does someone else take over?
Well, he does eventually embrace his role as king, but not in the way you might expect. He chooses to rule with compassion and understanding, prioritizing peace and harmony over military conquest.
Interesting. So he rejects that traditional model of kingship, the whole might makes right mentality, and instead opts for a more enlightened approach. That's pretty subversive for a play written in the 17th century, don't you think?
Absolutely. Ben seems to be suggesting that true strength lies not in brute force, but in empathy and wisdom, and that's a message that still resonates today, especially in a world where power is so often associated with aggression and dominance.
And what about Cleomena? Does she choose love or duty? Does she end up with Thursander?
Here's where things get even more even more interesting. Cleomena, she does discover Thursander's true identity, and she's furious about the deception.
I bet. Who wouldn't be angry after being tripped like that?
Exactly. But remember, this is Cleomena, the warrior princess. She's not one to just sit around and mope. She challenges Thursander to a duel, determined to avenge her wounded pride.
Wow, so it's a showdown between love and vengeance. Who wins?
Well, the duel never actually takes place. Just as they're about to fight, there's this sudden revelation that changes everything. It turns out that Cleomena and Thursander are long lost siblings separated in childhood.
Wait, what? Their brother and sister? Talk about a plot twist. So much for that love triangle.
Right. It's a classic case of mistaken identity taken to a whole new level, and it completely reframes their relationship. Suddenly the romantic tension kind of dissipates, replaced by familial love.
That's a pretty clever way to resolve the conflict, and it avoids a potentially messy and tragic ending. But But what about Olympia? She's still in love with their Sander, who, as far as she knows, is a woman named Clementis.
True, and Ben doesn't she doesn't shy away from exploring the complexities of Olympia's situation. In the end, Olympia chooses to release their Sander from any obligation, recognizing that their relationship was built on a foundation of deception.
So she chooses self-respect over a love that was based on a lie. That's a pretty powerful statement, especially for a female character in a 17th century play.
It is. Ben gives Olympia agency and allows her to make a choice that prioritizes her own well-being, and that's a subtle but significant departure from the way that female characters were often portrayed in plays of that era.
So to recap, Orson Welles embraces a more compassionate form of leadership. Cleopatra and their Sander discover their sibling bond, and Olympia prioritizes her own happiness. It's not exactly your typical happily ever after ending, but it's definitely thought-provoking.
Exactly, and that's what makes The Young King such a fascinating play. It's full of surprises and subversions, and it leaves you pondering the complexities of human relationships, the nature of power, and the choices we make in the face of unexpected circumstances.
I'm also struck by the fact that despite all the twists and turns, the ending is ultimately hopeful. Peace prevails. Families are reunited, and love, albeit in different forms, triumphs over adversity.
That's a great observation, and it speaks to Ben's underlying optimism, her belief in the possibility of redemption and reconciliation.
So what does this all mean? What's the takeaway message Ben's trying to convey?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think that's precisely what Ben intended. She wants to provoke discussion, to encourage us to grapple with these big questions about love, power, and the choices we make.
It's like she's saying, here's the story. Now you decide what it means.
Exactly, and that's what makes it such a rich and rewarding experience. It's not a play that gives you easy answers. It's a play that invites you to think for yourself.
Well, it's been a fascinating journey exploring this often overlooked play by Aphra Behn. Thanks for guiding us through it all.
It's been my pleasure. I hope this deep dive has sparked a curiosity in our listeners to discover more about Aphra Behn and the world of Restoration theater.
Me too. And on that note, dear listeners, we encourage you to seek out The Young King and experience its magic for yourselves.
And as you read it, consider this. What does Ben's play say about the complexities of identity, and how do the societal expectations placed upon us, especially women, shape our choices and ultimately our destinies?
Lots to ponder, folks. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, happy reading.